In 2004, Ernie Lee Fletcher didn't pass a state budget, which the Kentucky Supreme Court eventually in 2005 deemed unconstitutional. Then Fletcher was spending the money. When the budget wasn't passed, he still continued spending the money, and that too was deemed unconstitutional. What should have happened is he should have just allowed the money to expire, and then when the state failed, it would be up to the people at the ballot box in order to rectify the situation. In November 2004, Fletcher signed a death warrant for a man, and that man was lethally injected until his heart quit beating and his lungs quit breathing and his life ceased to exist. A group of doctors tried unsuccessfully to revoke Fletcher's doctor's certificate because the American Medical Association says that a doctor is not allowed to participate in an execution. Ernest Lee Fletcher also raised taxes on cigarettes, so he raised taxes. This is a Republican that was in favor of taxes. In May 2005, Attorney General Greg Stumbo filed charges against the Fletcher administration, alleging that Fletcher had circumvented the state merit system for hiring, promoting, demoting, and firing state employees by basing decisions on employees' political loyalties. On August 29th, Fletcher granted pardons to the 9 indicted administration officials, and he issued a blanket pardon for any and all persons who have committed or may be accused of committing any offense. So a pardon to all those who committed any offense. With regard to this, Greg Stumbo's initiated an investigation. Governor Bramlette, the 23rd governor of Kentucky, also issued a blanket pardon for the ex-Confederates of Kentucky in December 1865. So the Governor Bramlette, the 23rd governor of Kentucky, was extraordinarily racist, and he was a Democrat. And just like the majority of the General Assembly, the Governor Bramlette opposed the passage of the 14th and the 15th Amendment. And Governor Bramlette protested the establishment of the Freedmen's Bureau in the Commonwealth. And the Freedmen's Bureau was a federal organization dedicated to protecting the rights of the newly freed African slaves. Fletcher, again, like Governor Bree Reeton Jones did in the early 1990s, passed a mandatory seatbelt law to increase militarism again in Kentucky. In 2006, Fletcher used his line item veto to trim $370 million in projects from the budget passed by the Assembly. Although falling short of his initial prediction of veto in $938 million, Fletcher used the line item veto more than any other governor in state history. On August 11, 2006, Special Judge David E. Melcher ruled that because the personnel violations were allegedly committed while Fletcher was acting in his official capacity as governor, was protected by executive immunity. And so therefore he could not be prosecuted until he had left office. So Kentucky's governor is the head of the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The governor of Kentucky is also protected by executive immunity. So the governor of Kentucky is a dictator, and they're allowed to do whatever they want to do. On August 24th, Fletcher and Stumbo announced such an agreement. They were forced to make an agreement. So on August 24th of 2006, under the settlement that Stumbo and Fletcher came to, Fletcher acknowledged that evidence strongly indicated wrongdoing by his administration, but he would not admit any wrongdoing personally. Fletcher also acknowledged that Stumbo's prosecution of the case was a necessary and proper exercise of his constitutional duty, and he ensured that the abuses of the merit system would be ended. In addition to dropping the charges against Fletcher, Stumbo conceded that any violations by Fletcher's administration were without malice. So it wasn't intentional. 4 members of the state personnel board were appointed by Fletcher, were required to step down. Their replacements would be chosen by Fletcher from a list provided by Stumbo. So Stumbo pulled a power play and was able to get some of his people into the personnel board. In 2007, Stephen Lynn Beshear, a lawyer, defeated Gatewood in the Democratic primaries, and then he defeated Republican Ernest Lee Fletcher, who was challenged by Ann Northup within his own party in the general election. So he defeated the incumbent, which is remarkable, by a large margin, I believe 60% to 40, in order to become the 61st governor in Kentucky's history.
And then there's my old friend Steve Beshear. Steve, you may find it hard to believe, but every time I see you, it brings a smile to my face. I remember our race in 1996. It was over so early, I was able to give a victory speech and go to an afternoon movie.
Thousands remained without electricity.
Now, Sunday, the governor declared a state of emergency.
Governor Steve Beshear toured the heavily
damaged. He took some time to shake hands with those who will need the assistance.
You doing okay?
It's a comfort to know that he's here and he's handling it, because those of us that went through the ice storm know that he handled things very well.
Each time Kentucky has faced a crisis, Steve Beshear's steady hand has led us through. Calm in the face of adversity, proven in times of crisis, strong and decisive. Steve Beshear, tested, trusted, tough.
I will take responsibility for what our law firm did in Kentucky Central, because we did one heck of a job. One heck of a job.
Steve, you and the firm made $21 million, while 800 Kentuckians lost their jobs and thousands lost their savings. And you were removed from the case after an ethics investigation. An investigation your firm paid $100,000 to cover up.
One heck of a job.
Most folks in Kentucky have never been in a casino. But it seems choosing between me and Steve Beshear is coming down to casino gambling. He wants it, I don't. How bad could it really be? I've visited some towns and cities to find out. Places casino gambling has laid a hand, and I'm taking you with me. It's a story without a happy ending.
I took an oath as Attorney General to protect Kentucky's working families and Kentucky consumers. Steve Beshear took that same oath. Steve Beshear sold out. He lobbied for the predatory payday lenders that he'd sworn an oath to protect Kentuckians against. He allowed them to make millions off the backs of working poor Kentuckians. That's wrong. I think people need to know. Here's a fellow that wants to be governor of our state who forgot the obligation that he had to protect our state's most vulnerable citizens.
The facts are out there. Go look at these communities. Okay. You'll see that they are well-run and vibrant economies. The facts are out there. Go look at these communities. Okay. You'll see that they are well-run and vibrant economies. The facts are out there. Go look at these communities. Okay. You'll see that they are well-run and vibrant economies.
It is time to once again protect working families in this state by aggressively enforcing our labor laws, and as your governor, I'll make sure that happens.
Soon after taking office, Lynn Beshear ordered $78 million in budget cuts because there was going to be a $434 million projected deficit in the state budget. So again, just like 20 years ago, there is a $400+ million budget fall in the state's budget. Just like there's several $100 million short deficit in the state budgets now in 2012. Lynn Beshear lost control of the budget, which used to be the governor's responsibility, but now the General Assembly has taken control of it. So much of the debate in the 2008 legislative session centered on crafting the budget for the 2008-2010 biennium, a period when the state was projected to encounter a shortfall of nearly $1 billion. Beshear listed early childhood education and expanded health care for children among the priorities that he was unable to address in the session. In the final hours of the legislative session, both houses of the General Assembly resorted to the controversial practice of stopping the clocks in the respective chambers a few minutes before midnight in order to avoid the constitutionally mandated deadline for the end of the session, midnight, on April 15th. The Assembly then passed 12 bills between midnight and 1 o'clock on April 16th before adjourning. Steve Beshear later on April 26th, 10 days later, vetoed that budget. On July 31st, 2008, a Lexington judge sided with Lynn Beshear in validating the law and declaring that the General Assembly would no longer be allowed to use the practice of stopping the clocks. 2009 legislative session, Due to the state's worsening economy, the primary issue facing the legislature for the session was a $456 million budget shortfall. Beshear called another special legislative session in June 2009 to address another $1 billion that the budget in the state of Kentucky did not have. So another gap, another budget, $1 billion budget gap. Early in the 2010 legislative session, Beshear presented his biennial budget proposal to the General Assembly. The state projected a $1.5 billion shortfall for the biennium. And Beshear once again proposed to make up for the shortfall with revenue generated from expanded gaming, since he was supposed to bring in gambling. That's what he was elected on the mandate to do. In May 2010, legislators reconvened and they passed the budget. Beshear utilized his line item veto on 19 items in the budget, and he claimed they restricted his ability to implement the reduction in executive expenses mandated by the budget. Legislators were unable to override the vetoes because the special session had already adjourned. So I guess Beshear can veto legislation after a special session adjourns, and that's kosher. The 2011 legislative session clashed once again over the budget. Beshear's plan involved moving $166 million from the second year of the biennial budget to cover the shortfall and cover the cost in the second year through savings achieved by switching to a managed care plan for Medicaid. David Williams' plan, passed by the Republican majority in the state Senate, called for $101 million in cuts to state government spending to cover the shortfall. Without a plan in place, Stephen Lynn Beshear estimated that the state would have to cut Medicaid reimbursements to healthcare providers by 30%. Beshear then used his line item veto to strike the spending cuts and the savings assessment provisions per a previous arrangement with Democratic lawmakers. By eliminating those provisions, the version of the bill, the budget bill signed by Steve Beshear, was essentially the same plan that he had proposed during the regular session. So Beshear was able to get his budget back in 2011, but by tricks, judicial tricks, with a line item veto and I guess executive tricks. 2 months ago, in November 2011, Stephen Lynn Beshear defeated Republican David Williams and independent candidate Gatewood Galbraith for governor, and he became the third governor in Kentucky's history to have 2 consecutive terms in office. Stephen Lynn Beshear steals the governor's mansion just like all the other governors in Kentucky have done for the last 20 years since he didn't have a Democratic legitimacy. 28% of Kentucky's electorate voted. There's a turnout rate of 28%. So that means 72% of Kentuckians didn't vote. That means this government is not democratically legitimate. In fact, the will of the people, the 70%, 72%, the overwhelming majority, 72%, don't believe in any government participating in any government whatsoever. Last night, at the State of Kentucky speech, Steve Beshear is again making gambling his main legislative issue, since he failed to enact that mandate when he won on that platform in 2007. There's also going to be hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be cut from Kentucky's state services and state jobs. Beshear said at his 2012 State of Kentucky address that the key to balancing this budget lies not on the revenue side, but on the spending side. We will be cutting a lot. The numbers are so wretched that we will be likely to be forced to carve into some of our most critical and basic services, and it will hurt. According to the U.S. Census, the poverty rate in Kentucky in 2010 is 19%. 19%. So 1 out of 5 Kentuckians as of 2010 are poor, which is identical to what it was in 1990, 20 years ago. So poverty is a perennial institution in Kentucky since its founding in 1792. A December 2011 Gallup poll says that America has an 18% unemployment rate and Appalachia has a 30% unemployment rate. A recent U.S. Census survey concluded that 1 out of 2 Americans are poor, and that if the rich states are going to go down, it's no illusion to expect the poorest of the poor to go down even harder. Kentucky is the number 1 state for the fastest growing prisons, number 1 state for child deaths in child abuse cases, number 1 state for total amount of cancer deaths, number 1 state with the poorest mental health, and Kentucky is the number 1 state in the U.S. for tooth decay. Kentucky is the 2nd worst state for poorest physical health. Kentucky is the 10th